Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, Toan and Lytudiem's story has reached its most intense moment. After the doctor performed an ultrasound and ran tests on the baby, the two of them are now sitting outside the hospital hallway, waiting for a result that could completely change their lives. Is Toan really the father of the baby in Lytudiem's womb? Or will the truth behind everything bring a shocking twist that neither of them expected? In just a few minutes, the testing room door will open and the truth will finally be revealed. That moment could bring overwhelming joy, or it could be a turning point that makes everything fall apart. Don't take your eyes off this video, because the next part will leave you breathless. And if you enjoy dramatic stories like this, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the next developments in Toan and Lytudiem's story. The real story is only just beginning. The news of Lytudiem's pregnancy came to Toan like a strong gust of wind, sweeping through a life that had only just begun to settle down again. In the very first moment, a flash of happiness appeared on his face. Toan's eyes lit up as he looked into Lytudiem's anxious gaze. After everything they had been through, a child felt like an unexpected gift from fate. But that happiness lasted only a few brief seconds. Deep inside Toan, another thought quietly appeared like a shadow he couldn't easily shake off. Their past wasn't simple. The turbulent days they had gone through, the time they spent apart, and the things that were never fully spoken made it impossible for him to completely push away the doubt in his mind. He didn't want to think badly of Lytudiem, but he also couldn't ignore the growing sense of uneasiness inside him. After a moment of silence, Toan suggested that they go to the hospital together. Not just for a prenatal checkup, but also to take a test to confirm the biological relationship. For him, it wasn't about a lack of love, he simply needed certainty, so he could move forward without any lingering doubts. Lytudiem didn't object. Her eyes were calmer than Toan expected. She also wanted to know the condition of the baby growing inside her and make sure everything was okay. Her agreement made the atmosphere between them quiet but clearer. Without saying much more, the two of them began getting ready to leave the house. The door closed behind them, opening the way to a new journey. This trip to the hospital wasn't just a medical visit. It might decide the future of all three of them. Diem and Toan walked into the hospital in an atmosphere that felt both familiar and tense. The long hallway was lit by cold white lights, and the sound of patients' and nurses' footsteps echoed softly across the shiny tiled floor. The faint smell of disinfectant in the air made everything feel more serious than usual. The two of them walked side by side in silence. Each was lost in their own thoughts. Diem gently placed a hand on her stomach as a natural reflex, while Toan occasionally glanced at her. His eyes filled with a mix of worry and anticipation. When they reached the reception desk, they stopped in front of the check-in counter. A middle-aged doctor looked up from a stack of medical files and listened as Toan explained why they had come in. After a brief conversation, the doctor began writing things down carefully. Questions about their personal information, the timing of Lytudiem's missed period, and her current health condition were asked one by one. Toan stood beside her, occasionally adding details when needed. The medical record was gradually filled out. The doctor closed the booklet, handed it back to Toan and Lytudiem, and calmly explained the next steps. Wait for their turn for the prenatal exam and the necessary tests. They left the desk and found an empty row of seats in the waiting area. Around them were other couples' faces, showing a mixture of nervousness and hope. Every now and then, the hospital loudspeaker called out patients' names, making the atmosphere feel even more tense. Toan held the medical booklet in his hands, his eyes stopping on the lines where his name and Diem's name were written. In just a few more minutes, they would learn the truth about the baby growing inside her. The waiting time seemed short, yet it felt almost suffocatingly long. Toan and Diem sat close together on a long bench in the hospital hallway. The white lights above cast a cold glow over the quiet space. The sound of nurses' footsteps, the rustling of paperwork, and the occasional announcement over the hospital speaker. Calling patients' names made the waiting feel even more tense. The medical booklet rested in Toan's hands. He held it so tightly that his fingers had begun to turn pale. Every now and then, his eyes shifted toward the closed examination room door. Each passing minute seemed longer than usual. Beside him, Diem sat quietly, one hand gently resting on her stomach, like an unconscious habit. Suddenly, the examination room door opened. The doctor stepped out, glanced at the list, and called the names of Diem and Toan. Both of them stood up almost at the same time. No one said a word, but their steps were quicker than before. Inside the examination room, the lights were much brighter. Diem was guided to lie down on the examination bed to prepare for the ultrasound. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm as the doctor began the checkup. Toan stood beside her, almost holding his breath. His eyes were fixed on the ultrasound monitor, as if searching for the answer to all the thoughts spinning in his mind. The doctor watched the screen carefully for a moment before speaking slowly. Based on the initial results, the fetus appeared to be around 4 weeks old. A tiny spot had just formed, still very early, but already showing signs of development. The room suddenly fell completely silent. However, the doctor also explained that additional tests would still be needed to check the baby's health. At the same time, if the family wanted to confirm the biological relationship, further testing procedures could also be arranged. Toan remained standing there, his eyes still locked on the screen. In that moment, he knew his life might be about to take a completely different direction. After completing the initial ultrasound, the doctor began carrying out the necessary testing procedures to further examine the baby and determine the biological relationship. The atmosphere in the examination room became so quiet that the only sounds were the soft hum of the equipment and the rustling of paperwork. Diem was still lying on the examination bed, her eyes fixed on the ceiling as she tried to stay calm. Inside her mind, hundreds of thoughts were tangled together. Meanwhile, Toan stood beside the examination table, watching every movement the doctor made with complete focus. He barely spoke, but his eyes were filled with questions that still had no answers. Once the sample collection was finished, the doctor carefully recorded everything in the medical file. Several samples were placed into sealed bags to be sent to the laboratory. Finally, the doctor closed the file and gently asked Diem and Toan to wait outside in the hallway for the results. The examination room door closed behind them. Diem sat down first, her hands tightly. Diem sat down first, her hands tightly clasped together. She tried to remain calm, but the worry in her eyes was impossible to hide. Toan sat beside her, leaning slightly forward, his eyes fixed on the laboratory door at the end of the hallway. Different possibilities kept running through his mind, from hope to doubt. Each passing minute felt painfully slow, stretching longer and longer. Every now and then, the sound of doctors' and nurses' footsteps echoed through the hallway, making both of them instinctively look up. But the door still hadn't opened. Somewhere behind those walls, the test results were being processed, and in just a few more minutes, the truth would finally be revealed. Toan and Diem sat quietly on the long bench in the hospital hallway, the silence between them growing heavier with every passing minute. The fluorescent lights above cast a pale glow over the corridor, making the white walls and polished floor seem even colder. Around them, other patients came and went, some walking quickly, some speaking softly with nurses. But for Toan and Diem, it felt as if time had slowed down. Diem kept her hands gently resting on her stomach. Every now and then, she took a slow breath, trying to calm the nervous rhythm of her heart. She didn't dare to look at Toan too often. She knew that he was waiting for the answer just as anxiously as she was. Toan leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. His eyes were fixed on the laboratory door at the end of the hallway. Behind that door, somewhere inside the busy hospital, the results that could change their lives were being finalized. Minutes felt like hours. Suddenly, the laboratory door opened. A doctor stepped out holding a thin folder of medical documents. He looked down at the papers for a moment, then scanned the hallway. Ms. Diem, Mr. Toan. Both of them stood up almost instantly. Yes, that's us. Toan replied, his voice steady but low. The doctor nodded politely and motioned for them to come closer. I have the results of the examination and the tests, he said calmly. For a brief moment, neither Toan nor Diem spoke. The air between them felt thick with anticipation. The doctor opened the folder and pulled out several sheets of printed reports. Attached to them was a clear black and white ultrasound image. First, the doctor began. I want to talk about the pregnancy itself. He held up the ultrasound image so they could see it clearly. This is the ultrasound scan taken earlier. Toan and Diem both leaned forward instinctively. On the image inside a small dark oval shape, there was a tiny bright spot, no bigger than a grain of rice. It looked simple, almost fragile, but it was unmistakably the beginning of a new life. At approximately 4 weeks, the doctor explained the embryo is still very small, but the gestational sac is clearly visible. The development we're seeing right now appears normal for this stage. Diem's eyes widened slightly as she stared at the image. That's the baby, she asked softly. The doctor smiled gently. Yes. It's still very early, but everything looks healthy so far. For a moment, Diem couldn't speak. She felt a warm wave of emotion rising inside her chest. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach again, as if she could already feel the tiny life growing inside her. The doctor then placed the ultrasound photo carefully on top of the report. We also completed the requested biological testing. He continued, glancing briefly at Toan. Toan felt his heartbeat suddenly grow louder in his ears. This was the moment. The doctor flipped to another page in the folder and read the results. The DNA comparison between the fetal sample and the father's sample has been analyzed. He paused for a brief second. The result shows a confirmed biological match. Toan blinked, almost unsure if he had heard correctly. The doctor looked directly at him and repeated clearly, the probability of paternity is greater than 99.9%. Mr. Toan, you are the biological father of the baby. For a split second, the hallway seemed to go completely silent. Toan's mind froze. Then the words slowly settled in. You are the father. He let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Diem turned toward him immediately, her eyes searching his face. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Toan nodded slowly, still processing the moment. "Yes, I heard." The tension that had been building inside him for days, maybe even weeks, seemed to dissolve all at once. All the doubts, the questions, the silent worries he had tried to push away suddenly lost their weight. In their place, something warm and powerful filled his chest. Relief and happiness. He turned toward Diem. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Their eyes met, and everything they had been feeling seemed to pass between them without words. Then Diem's lips slowly curved into a smile. Tears appeared in the corners of her eyes. "It's really our baby," she said softly. Toan felt his own throat tighten. "Yes," he replied, "our baby." The doctor watched them with the gentle expression. "I'll print a copy of the ultrasound image and the report for your records," he said. "Everything looks good so far, but it's important that you schedule regular prenatal checkups." Diem nodded. "I will. Thank you, doctor." A few minutes later, the doctor handed them the ultrasound image and the official medical report. "Congratulations to both of you," he added. They thanked him again before stepping away from the consultation area. Back in the hallway, the atmosphere felt completely different. Just a short while ago, the bench where they had been sitting felt like a place filled with tension and uncertainty. Now it felt lighter, brighter. Toan looked down at the ultrasound image in his hands. Even though it was just a tiny white shape on a grainy black background, it felt incredibly meaningful. "That tiny dot," he murmured. "That's our child." Diem leaned closer to look again. She couldn't stop smiling. "It's amazing," she said quietly. Toan looked at her. For the first time that day, the worry had completely disappeared from her face. Instead, there was warmth and hope. Without thinking too much, Toan reached out and gently took her hand. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Diem looked at him in surprise. "For what?" "For doubting. Even if it was only in my mind." She shook her head gently. "You were scared," she said. "I understand." He squeezed her hand slightly. "But now we know the truth." "Yes," she replied. And now Toan continued glancing again at the ultrasound photo. "We have someone new to think about." Diem laughed quietly, wiping a small tear from the corner of her eye. "A very tiny someone." They both laughed softly. For a moment, they simply stood there together in the hospital hallway, looking at the image that had just changed their future. Around them, the hospital continued its busy rhythm. Nurses walking quickly, doctors speaking with patients, announcements echoing through the speakers. But for Toan and Diem, everything felt calm, peaceful. Toan carefully placed the ultrasound photo back into the folder. Then he looked at Diem again. "Let's go home," he said. She nodded. "Yes." As they began walking toward the exit of the hospital, Toan felt a quiet excitement growing inside him. Just a few hours earlier, he had come here filled with questions and uncertainty. Now he was leaving with something completely different. A clear answer and a new beginning. Beside him, Diem walked slowly, one hand resting gently over her stomach. Inside her, a tiny new life had already begun. And in that bright hospital hallway, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of everyday life, Toan and Diem stepped forward into a future that suddenly felt full of hope.